Welcome everybody to Hope for Our Times, and the studio I am at today may look a little bit different to you. And there's a reason for that, is because I have this incredible opportunity to be here in Jerusalem at the JNS studio with the chief editor, Alex Traiman. And I am so thankful that you just gave me this opportunity to meet with me.
Well, welcome to Jerusalem. Welcome to the Holy Land.
This is great. It's always good to come here. God's land. I love coming here. Your staff is wonderful. And I've been wanting to meet with you and be able to come here for a long time. And I finally made it by here.
We're really glad you made it.
It was great. So I want to work through some things, some dynamics that Israel is going through. And hopefully from your perspective, help people understand things we don't hear in the Western news. And especially when we look at the hostage situation. And but I'm going to start off here with this question. How does living in Israel affect the way that you experience the news, especially stories about conflict and politics?
Well, first of all, we're in the eye of the hurricane over here, and we know that the entire world is focused on what's going on here. But I'm sure, as you have felt walking the streets over here, it actually feels very calm. So sometimes when you're in the eye of the storm, that's the calmest and the safest place to be. But it's been a nonstop battle, especially over the last 2 years, just covering all of the security developments, the diplomatic developments, the political developments, and there's not really any signal that it's going to slow up soon.
No, in fact, I'm watching everything. And so what I do is I take the news and I run it through the Bible. I want to make sure that, what does the Bible actually teach? Where are things going? I don't let the news interpret the Bible. I let the Bible interpret what I see going on around me. And I am a believer in God's covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. I believe it's an eternal covenant. God has a plan for Israel, past, present, and still future. And I look at things, and the things I watch in the news trouble me. Even currently, when we look at the hostage situation, I watch what the Trump administration is doing. If you don't want to answer anything I ask you, if you feel like it put you in a bad position, feel free to not answer it. But as I look at the hostage situation, the Israel exercising sovereignty over Judea and Samaria, not the West Bank, where do you see things going with the current so-called peace plan, because Hamas is still in control?
Well, you've put a lot out there, and I want to get to a bunch of those things. The first thing you said is that you live your life through a Torah lens, and we in Judaism, we read the Torah portion every week. We get to the whole cycle. This week we just read the chapter on Noah and the flood, and it says right in the beginning of the chapter that God told Noah that he was going to destroy the earth because the earth had become corrupted and filled with, and this word comes up, and it could mean a robbery, it could mean armed robbery, it could be interpreted as kidnapping, and you know what that word is? Hamas. It says that the world became corrupted with Hamas. And we know we've got a terrorist organization that's localized to Gaza called Hamas, but actually we see that the entire world has become corrupted with Hamas because we're seeing demonstrations for Hamas in Western cities all over the world, and the entire world putting immense pressure on us to stop defeating Hamas. So we see we're living with this every single day, and obviously when it comes to Judea and Samaria, when it comes to the peace deal, the hostages, I mean, there's a lot to unwind. It's very comforting for us to know that we've gotten all of our hostages back. Mm-hmm. I think if somebody would have told you on October 8th that at the end of this war that Israel was going to control half of the Gaza Strip, that 70% of Gaza was going to be basically flattened as we took out all the infrastructure, and we were going to get all of the living hostages back, and they took 255 hostages, living and dead bodies, you'd probably sign up for that, especially if I also told you that in the process we were going to defang Hezbollah by about 85% of their capabilities, that Syria was no longer going to pose a military threat or be a land bridge from Iran over to southern Lebanon so that they can rearm themselves, and that we would take out the Iranian nuclear program. I think everybody would have signed up for that result. So even though there's a lot of politics now and posturing and guessing diplomatically, what's happening, what isn't happening, our strategic situation is much, much better than it was even on October 6th. And you could see very clearly that we've come out of this war much stronger than we were before we got into it. As it relates to, Judea and Samaria, obviously, this is core to who we are as a people. We're called Jews, not because we're from the West Bank, even though I did see some kind of a meme that said, well, if it's a bank, then the Jews must own it. But we're called Jews because we're from Judea. All of the biblical stories that we're going to be reading in these weeks of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, they all took place in these areas that are known in the rest of the world as the West Bank. And the reason why it's called the West Bank is because they don't want you to know that that's Judea, where Jews are from. But I think we'll get there. We just have to be patient. And we know that if you read the stories in the book of Genesis, when Jacob has to take his birthright from Esau, he has to do it with cunning and with strategy. You can't just bulldoze your way through. So we'll get there at the right place and the right time.
I find it's very fascinating to watch all of the different dynamics. But from my perspective, I have concerns about Turkey. Erdogan is anti-Semitic. He does not like the Jews. He's made it known that he wants to come after Jerusalem. And I look and hear what he is saying about Gaza. He wants to be involved with the so-called negotiations in Gaza and part of the forces there. I look at that and I think, do you think that is an actual possibility?
Well, Turkey is definitely posturing to get involved in Gaza. They already are very active in Jerusalem and the areas near Jerusalem. They invest a lot into infrastructure in Muslim sections of Jerusalem. They have a presence already. I think what's a little bit troubling, perhaps, is that President Trump, who's been such a great friend to Israel, when people say that Trump has been the best friend in the White House that Israel ever had, they're not lying. That's the truth. But at the same time, he's going around saying that the Qataris are allies of the United States and even signed an executive order making the Qataris a protected ally of the United States, so that if anybody attacks Qatar, that it's a threat to the peace and security of the United States. And he's also said over and over again that President Erdogan of Turkey is an ally and a friend of the United States. And in Israel, we don't see it that way. We see Qatar as an enemy, and we see Turkey as an enemy. These are the financial and the ideological arms right now of the Muslim Brotherhood, of which Hamas is a member. Hamas is part of this Muslim Brotherhood alliance. And so there is cause to be concerned. And if you take out this threat, which was Iran and its proxy of Shiite terror organizations, and they also work with Hamas. They didn't have a problem working with a Sunni organization when it came to fighting Israel. But when you take this Iran threat out, so that creates a vacuum, and certainly Qatar and Turkey are looking to fill that vacuum.
So again, this is my perspective, right? So I read a lot of different news, follow JNS also, but it looks to me like Hamas, even Hezbollah to some extent, Iran are already starting to rearm themselves or find a way to at least fight back. We have the terrorist murderers that were released from Israeli prisons in the hostage deal. I praise God that the living hostages went back to their families. I could not imagine having my son or daughter being involved in that. That was just an absolute horror to me. But I look at it and think, for me, someone who supports Israel, it troubles me that sometimes when I look at the U.S. administration and I see, Turkey is a friend of, or the U.S. is a friend of Turkey, I have a hard time with it, specifically with Erdogan and Qatar, when Qatar is known to have funded much of what Hamas does. In a sense, Qatar is Hamas. Again, this is my perspective. So I don't want to put.
I don't think it's a
mouth.
unique perspective. Hamas leadership has been housed in Qatar for many years, and the Qataris, as you mentioned, have been funding Hamas. Now, that actually happened with the United States and Israel being complicit because we wanted to maintain a status quo in Gaza, and you had to get funds in there, and the feeling was that if you starve them, that they're going to become more radical. But actually, what we see with regard to terrorists is that being more destitute doesn't necessarily make them more extreme. I mean, look at Osama bin Laden, who was a very wealthy terrorist that organized the September 11th attacks. And we see that here as well. With regard to Hezbollah and Hamas, I mean, everybody is trying to figure out how much they can get away with. Everybody's testing. But Israel's military doctrine today is different than it was on October 6th. I mean, we allowed this massive buildup of tens of thousands of rockets and long-range missiles with huge payloads in southern Lebanon in the hands of Hezbollah before the war. And we allowed Hamas to build an entire network of tunnels underneath Gaza. I mean, this is a underground network longer than the New York City subway system, and to also build tens of thousands of rockets. And what we've done is neutralize that. But we're not just sitting back anymore and saying, okay, we did what we need to do and now we're done. I mean, you see, we signed some kind of a ceasefire arrangement in Lebanon earlier in the war, and we continue to attack against isolated movements every time we see weapons being moved, every time we see Hamas operatives coming down into the areas that we think are a threat to Israel. We're striking. And I think the same thing is going to be in Gaza right now. I mean, certainly there's a little quiet period where everybody's trying to feel what it is, but you know, we talk about a strategy of mowing the grass, and we hadn't mowed the grass in Gaza in a long time. We hadn't mowed the grass in Lebanon in close to 20 years. And so what we've done now is we've kind of like torn out the yard. We're laying new sod, but we're pulling out the weeds wherever we see them to make sure that these terror organizations will not pose a threat to Israel again in the near future.
So just for our audience sake, the term mowing the grass is in the sense when, for Hamas, for example, begins to rearm, you got to mow the lawn. You got the lawnmower, you mow the lawn, you get rid of those armaments. So that's the thought of mowing the grass, correct?
Absolutely.
And in this case, saying, okay, but
you can't change who terrorists are, right? And so the Biden administration, Antony Blinken, you know, he was saying for a long time, you know, you can't destroy Hamas because Hamas is an ideology. And it's true that you cannot destroy an ideology, but what you can do is make sure that those that have an ideology don't have the weapons to carry out their agenda, and they also don't control territory. And so that's what I think Israel is trying to accomplish. On the one hand, make sure that they're not a military threat, make sure that they're not governing in Gaza, and make sure that they can't rebuild. Okay,
so also I look at it in a couple of things here. One is, how does Israel keep Hamas or Hezbollah or Iran from rearming? That's one question. The other I have is, it appears to me that Israel is not allowed to win. Because when I look at Israel had surrounded Gaza City, the IDF had, they're about ready to win. So, again, this is an illustration I'll give you. American football. You're coming down to the fourth quarter, there's a minute left in the game, and one team is clearly winning. It's 50-0. They're about ready to go in for the touchdown, and the game's over. And all of a sudden, just before the last play of the game, the referee blows the whistle and says, hey, we got to start all over again. And there is a ceasefire, and now it's like Hamas can't be touched. And it appears that there's world powers that are saying Israel cannot, they just can't win. And it's been this way. I mean, I can go back to the British Mandate. You can go throughout history. You can go through world history. You can go back to the book Esther and trace this down. Do you have a perspective like that, or does that make sense to you?
Well, there's certainly those that don't want a Jewish state to exist, and they don't want a Jewish state to be strong, and it's been the doctrine of Western society to keep Israel balanced against the Palestinians, more recently to keep Israel balanced against Iran, and this is actually a doctrine for war. And I think Israel's done a lot to change that doctrine. Israel has emerged as a regional superpower, and certainly with regard to this war, you know, the Biden administration in Western Europe, they didn't want us to start the war to begin with, right? They tried to hold us back, and they tried to prevent us from winning. But then enter President Donald Trump, who I said, again, has been the best president that Israel's ever had. He restored the flow of weapons to Israel. He told us to do what we need to do. He said destroy Hamas. He said destroy Hezbollah. He said destroy Iran's nuclear reactors, and that's what we did. And he even participated at the very end of that strike with Operation Midnight Hammer, sending the B-2 bombers to take out the Fordo underground nuclear reactor in one amazing operation. But we had hostages, and this was why Hamas took the hostages on day one, because they knew how important every last individual is to us. I mean, I don't think any other country would care so much about the lives of 255, and then at the end, even 20 living hostages. You know, we're the only country that we value the life so much. But I think that what happened is that you get to a point, especially in Gaza, where Hamas had hidden themselves among all the civilian infrastructure that exists. Almost every apartment building almost has, has weapons, has an underground tunnel entrance. Every mosque, every school, every hospital. They set the stage for this for years, and we allowed them to do that. And you got to the point where you filed down all of their rocket capability. You've taken out more than half of their tunnels. You've killed all of their senior leadership. Yes, there are still terrorists running around with guns in the Gaza Strip, but the amount of time that it's going to take to fully eliminate Hamas completely as a threat, even if the Gaza City operation was successful, you're talking about being inside Gaza for another 2 years. And there just wasn't really the time to do that. The international community doesn't want Israel to do it. Israel's soldiers have been fighting now for 2 years, and this is a civilian army. They've got to go home. They got to go back to work. And we had to get the hostages back. And I think that this deal that we signed actually is the deal that Israel wanted. And I think most Israelis are very comfortable with the deal. Of course, now it's a situation where everybody's trying to see, who's the strong player, and I think it will emerge in the next several weeks.
Yeah, and obviously the enemies are still out there. I watched what's been going on in college campuses in America for quite some time. A lot of that was also funded by Qatari money.
And it still is.
And still is. Yesterday or the day before, there was an effigy of Netanyahu that was hung in Turkey.
Turkey, right.
And so we see the anti-Semitism, and then we have the IDF troops. This morning I get a cup of coffee, and it was at a bakery here in Jerusalem. It was just looking at all the people. They were young, working there, and I couldn't help but think, and there's a lot of employees there. They were in the war. They came here to work right now, but they might be called back. And it was really, it's hard for people to fathom that, but that is what you're dealing with. And that's got to take a toll on the psyche of obviously anybody in the IDF, but families and Israel as a whole.
Yeah, it definitely takes a significant toll. I know people that are, been months in the war, and they've just gotten called up again, and they're going to be inside Gaza protecting the 50% of Gaza that Israel currently controls. But I'll tell you, I think like a lot of Western society, Israel was growing soft. And after 2 years of looking the enemy in the face and doing what needed to be done in order to make life safe for Israelis, we've hardened everybody up. And we've just trained a generation of lions. And we see how Western society is collapsing itself because people are not willing to fight for the ideals and the values of the society. Here people are. People on October 7th, they ran down to Gaza to pick up arms and to do what was necessary. They were willing to put in the effort and risk their lives for 2 years in order to defeat Hamas, defeat Hezbollah, defeat Iran and its nuclear program. And I think that Israel is going to prove itself so much stronger. And actually, I really do believe that the best days for the state of Israel lie ahead.
They do. And I know they do because I know what the Bible says. The Bible also does talk about challenging times for Israel, but it's interesting. You mentioned raised up a generation of lions. I think of Zechariah chapter 12 in the English Bible talks about how that's exactly what happens is Israel raises up just like that, like lions at the time of David. They will be like David. I look at this, and I know this is going to be hard for some people to comprehend, but being here and watching the young people in the IDF, and you said Israel going soft like Western nations, but now what you're watching to me is like the greatest generation is rising up. And I believe God is doing something. This my thinking. God is moving Israel to a place of redemption. God had a plan for them past, present, and future. And I see everything moving in this direction, but I do believe Israel's in a very difficult time. I'm thankful that I'm able to come here and just support. I go back to the Bible, and I will stand with Israel. But I want to thank you for your time. We are out of time. I know you have things to do, but is there any closing words you have for our viewers, and also how can people follow JNS?
Absolutely. We pray for the rebuilding of Jerusalem 3 times a day. And as you walk around this city, you will see that the national bird here is the crane, because there's a crane up in every building site, and the city is just getting bigger, stronger, taller in every way. And so, I think that you're right, that the signals are all there. I think that those enemies of the Jewish people in the state of Israel, either they are godless, or they are perverting God's mandate, specifically with regard to radical Islam. I mean, they claim that they're doing this for God, but it's a complete perversion of what God wants. And even when you talk to them, you know that, and I tell them all the time, I say the only reason why we're here is because it's the will of Allah that we would return. And they acknowledge that that must be true. And they see that we're getting stronger and stronger. So, we have to weather the storm. We're not out of challenges. There's military challenges, there's diplomatic challenges. We're also fighting our own culture war here. The same way that you're fighting that in the United States, there's a real culture war taking place. We see in Europe there's a culture war taking place for the soul of Europe, and there's a culture war for the soul of Israel taking place as well. So we're fighting enemies on every single front, but I do think that there's a lot of divine assistance. You see that when Iran fires, almost 1,000 ballistic missiles. Each ballistic missile could have killed hundreds of people by itself, and we lost less than 30 people from all of those weapons. I think that there's been a lot of divine protection, and again, the Israelis are becoming more and more observant, more and more God-fearing, and I think it bodes well for the future of this country. And for people that want to get a better view of what's going on. The mainstream media is not going to tell you the story, because they're part of this progressive left alliance. And we're actually also seeing now on this isolationist right a very dangerous trend. The Tucker Carlsons, Candace Owens, Nick Fuentes, Alex Jones, Steve Bannon's, and these are people that, some of them, who were allies of the Jewish people in the state of Israel, and they're really turning on the Jewish people and using every blood libel that we've seen historically. So you can't necessarily trust the mainstream media. You can't necessarily trust what's coming out of these, alt-right podcasts. And you need to find a good source of truth. And I recommend to anybody, if you want to understand what's going on, go to jns.org. Go to our YouTube channel, JNS TV, and you will get hours and hours and articles of fact-based, honest reporting, news, analysis, and opinions.
Yeah, that was excellent, and I totally agree, everyone, with everything Alex just said. We're fighting this. The left is easy to recognize in America, but now we're watching what's happening on the right. And remember, we can stay with the Bible and we can understand what God's plan is and what God's will is. And I would want to encourage you to share this video with your friends, even those people that don't like Israel. But also I would encourage you to follow JNS. You will be blessed. You'll get the correct news. God bless you, everybody. Thank you for joining us. Thank you, Alex.
Thanks.